Assalamu alaikum everyone. This is going to be a short tutorial or a walkthrough for those who were absent in the previous classes to catch up with where the rest of the students who were there are at actually, and the ones who have attended the class and they still have confusions over certain elements or certain concepts. They can also um, benefit from this lecture. So I will start from the very basics, which is basically how to run or execute the program onto your Windows or Macintosh. So first of all, you need two pieces of software to download from the internet. Now you will have to go to Google. First, you need to download Python, and this can be found from the original website, which is python.org, and you can head over to their download section. I will post the exact link from where you can download the application, and I will post those links in the description. So once you get there, you will get to see the latest version for Windows over here, and if you want any other operating system, you can choose it from here. Just click on it and probably it will start downloading the latest version. So I just need to set it where to download. So this is going to be downloaded onto my desktop. You just click on start. The next thing that you need to download is the IDE. So the IDE that we are using is basically PyCharm, and it's a PyCharm community, or you can just search for PyCharm. All right, so in order to download the PyCharm, again, you search for PyCharm on Google, you get the download link. I will post the link from where you can download it. And once the website opens, you need to download the PyCharm community package, which is actually open source and free to use. Once you have the website in front of you, you can see that this is the PyCharm Professional, and if you scroll down, you get to see the PyCharm Community Edition. This is actually free to use. As you can see, this is free, built on open source. So again, you can download it for Windows, or you can drop it down. You can download for the latest Windows processors, the ARM64, or if you have any other operating system, you can look for that. I will put the download link in the description below, so you can download both of them. Now, the order in which you have to install is that first of all, you need to install the Python utility, which we have downloaded onto our desktop. So that it is basically a part of your system. After this, you are going to install the PyCharm community. And once you install and follow through the wizard process, it will automatically detect that your computer or your operating system already has the Python language installed. So it'll ask you whether to accept this or not. You just have to follow through the process. I already have these application installed and the language installed, which is why I will not be able to show how it actually performs, but it'll be very easy for you to select the options and follow through the process. Basically, your IDE needs to know which programming language you will be using to build your programs. All right. So considering that you have installed PyCharm and you have successfully integrated Python with it, so once you open up the application, the very first thing that you will be having in front of you, or what you need to do, is actually run, or let's say open up a new project. So this is the dialog box that you need to focus on. You need to know where your project is actually going to be saved. I have seen a lot of students that they get done with the examination and still they don't know where the project is basically saved. By default, it is actually in the PyCharm projects, which exists in your documents folder. So you can see that it's located in the C users, and this is my username, in which you have the PyCharm projects folder, in which you are going to have your project. So you can still change the location by clicking on the browse, and you can choose where you want to save your project. If it is still the same, you can just select this, and you can even have a new folder added to this directory. I just need to click on OK. Now this is actually the location, and you can see that the base interpreter, the Python, is basically integrated, so you should be getting this message over here, or the language being detected in this part. Once the project is basically initiated, so let's say I'm going to have it in PyCharm projects, I'm going to have a new folder over here, and let's say it's my test. We click on OK. So as you can see, users, my documents, PyCharm projects, and this is the test folder in which all the files for this particular project is going to be saved. So we click on OK, and we click on create. So you can open the project in a new window. Yeah, this is exactly what I want to do. So it will take a couple of minutes to initiate everything. As you can see that this is the folder from where we are working, and this is where you are to input your code. So this needs to be labeled as main.py. py is basically for Python, and this is the welcome code. It's up to you whether you want to keep it. Basically we start with the blank code. So I hope that you were able to understand this whole process of downloading, installing, integrating Python, initiating the project, and getting started with your first piece of code. Now, next thing that I want to talk about are basically, or we start from the data types, we start from the constants, and we start from the variables. You do know that in your pseudocode, when you are defining a procedure or your function, you have to state down the declarations. Now in Python, you are not supposed to, give your declaration statements, right? You straight away start from your declarations plus the inputs. So they are basically dealt in just one statement. You don't have to write separate statements. However, the students appearing, or let's say using Python as their programming language for their P4, they are to mention their declarations in comments. So we start with comments. In Python, you are supposed to give your comments starting with a hashtag. So once you type in the hashtag, you can write whatever you want. So let's say I'm going to have a constant a is the name of my constant as integer. So this is basically the declaration in which you have to type in your variable name and you have to give your data type. If you would have been doing it in Visual Basic, Visual Basic operates in a different way. You need to have declarations in Visual Basic. I'm just quoting an example. If I was programming in Visual Basic, I would have started with dim a as integer. All right, and then in the next line I would have typed in a equals to 20. This is how you do it in Visual Basic. So in the first statement, you are actually declaring a variable in the memory. So dim actually stands for declare in memory. A is the name of my variable. As integer is basically the data type. So you define or you declare your variable and its data type in the declaration statement. However, in Python, you don't have to do it. If it is a constant is something that your variable will have a constant value throughout the program. Okay, so In Python, you don't have to state down the declaration statement as a part of your program code, but you still have to mention it as a comment. So what do we mean? We still have to write the declaration, but that declaration has to be in the comment form. But when we talk about the actual value, and since we are talking about constants, right? So if I type in a equals to 20, so Python automatically does two things in just one statement. It has automatically declared a variable called a, and it has assigned a value which is in the integer form to the variable a. Okay, so this is what we call a constant, that wherever this particular a is going to be used, its value is going to be 20. However, we can apply different operations to change this value, or apply arithmetic operators and different things to, change the value, or add or subtract and stuff like that. But for the start of the program, a is being declared with the value 20, which is in the integer form. So it is automatically considering that this is in the integer form. 2. You have the integer. You also have float. Now float is basically used for numbers with decimals. So for instance, if I type in b equals to 20.5, Python automatically indicates that b is basically a variable which is acting as a constant, and it is being assigned a value of 20.5, and the data type is automatically set to float because it has a decimal in it. Now again, if you have done this, or you have written this statement, you also have to type this over here as constant, b as float. Now case sensitivity does not matter in your comment, so you may write it in all caps, the data type, which you are supposed to do in your pseudocodes, but you may type them in small caps or small letters as well. It doesn't matter, since the actual format does not count. So comment can be, case sensitive or not case sensitive. So it's up to you. But yes, mentioning, or let's say listing them as comments, they carry marks for those who are programming in Python. So be very careful about, whenever you are declaring constants or variables, that you do mention their data types, or you declare them as comments. Then we also have another, I can also have another constant equals to, and you put a speech mark. Speech mark will indicate that this particular variable, which is acting as a constant, is being assigned with a string value. Okay, so you don't have text, you don't have short text or long text. Over in Python, we have string. Okay, so let's say I would say that testing Python, right? So we can say that, okay, this is basically a constant, c as string. This is exactly what you need to do. Okay, so this section was all about constants, or assigning values and the data types from the very start. Now we also need to talk about two more basic things. One being the inputs, two the outputs, and obviously the shortcut of how to run your code. So if you look at this particular piece of code that I've written, I've taken three variables. I've assigned one to be the integer, one to be a float, and one to be a string. I can run my code or test my code by pressing Shift plus F10. So if I do that, I will get to see the run at the bottom of the screen, and over here it says that, okay, the process finished with my code. Why? Because the processor came into one line number 1. It detected this line to be a comment, moved on to the other one. This was detected as comment. 3, detected as comment. This was a constant declared with an integer value 20. This was a constant declared with a decimal value or a float value, again a constant, and this is also a constant declared with a string value. However, my code does not have any output statement. So basically all of these variables or constants are basically declared and assigned with a particular value or a particular data type. Now, in order to take outputs in your Python, it's very simple. All you need to do is type in print, round bracket open, and then, for instance, if I want a custom printout, so I would say in the speech marks, I would say this is my custom output message. Now, if I press F10, again, the same number of lines are going to be processed by the processor. However, when it will come at line number 8, that is basically an output statement. So we press F10 and you can see that this is executing, or the output is what we got as a custom message. So this is my custom output message. Now, instead of having the message as it is, I can even have the values displayed for my constants. So instead of my custom message, I can even type in print and let's say the variable a, which is actually a constant, right? So now if I take the output of this particular program that I've written, I will only get the value of a, which is 20. So this is how you can directly take an output of the variable or the constant which is being assigned a particular value. This can be changed like with B, shift F10, and you can see that 20.5 is basically being my output. I can even change this to my C, which is actually a string value. And if I press shift F10 over here, this is capital C. So case sensitivity matters. So make sure that the variable and the output have the same case in order to get an output, which is why it was detecting this as an error. So now if I take the output, we get the value of C as my output. So basic values assignment, basic constants being assigned with a particular value and data type being discussed. Now there's going to be another scenario in which you are to take the input from the user. Now how do you do that? Simple statement is that you can type in input, round bracket open close, and inside the input you are going to type in your custom message. Okay, so the custom message is please input the number of your choice, and I'll put a colon and a space. Now this is going to be taking an input. Okay, so if we press shift F10, as you can see that this is basically going to take an input from the user. And please note what happened. Line 1 comment, line 2 comment, 3 comment. This is a value, value assigned, and 7 is basically where you want to take an input from the user. And as you can see, when I executed this code, the computer is actually waiting for my input. So as soon as I type in my input, which can be anything, it can be a string value, it can be a float, or it can be an integer value, it can be a Boolean value. After that, it has a print command. So after I give my input over here, the input is just going to be stored in the memory, and next in line is basically the print, which is C, and that C is basically assigned with this particular value. So over here, I'm going to type in, let's say, my name. So this is going to be taken as my input. However, we are not taking an output for this. But as soon as I press enter, it basically prints C, which is testing Python. So the point I wanted to make was how to take an input from the user, right? And then it was the output. So the sequence in which the commands are going to be executed, that matters in Python. It goes in the sequence, which is why the indexing is given with all the commands. Now, further moving on, if I want my custom value or the input from the user to be assigned onto a variable, so that can be done as well. So for instance, over here in line number 6, I have input given a constant value to my variable c. Over here, what I'll do is I'll again put c equals to this. So that means that initially it was being assigned this value, this string value, but in the next line, in the next command, I'm taking an input from the user, and that basically gets assigned to my variable c, and then it basically prints it out. So let's see if I execute this F10. So you can see the custom message. Let's change the message to input the value for C, right? So let's have this message instead of the number of your choice. Shift F10. So we'll run it again. As you can see, please input the value for C. Okay, now the value for C is this. Now when I press enter, it will come down to instruction 8, which is going to print the value of C. Now let's see which value of C gets printed. So we press enter. As you can see that the output of C now is basically the input that I gave in line number 7. So that is how you take an output of a variable. That is how you can assign an input value from the user to a variable. And this also tells us that if the same variable is basically going to have another value later in the program code, so that value becomes the recent most value or the actual current value of that variable, which is going to be a part of your output. I hope you were able to follow this line of code. Now, further moving on, we will also talk about arrays. Arrays is basically the collection of values of the same data type. Okay, so we can also have the input from the user, and we can also assign a data type right there and then to our input and then assign it to a variable. So how do we do it? So let's say we're going to remove this, and what I'm going to do is I am going to declare a variable which is going to be assigned an integer value, right? And that integer value is basically not going to be typed in, it is going to be taken from the user. So we type in the same input and round bracket open close. So I will have the custom message over here. So please input an integer value. So you are indicating the user to input an integer value, right? So if I just run this, you can see that the input basically comes, and the value, let's say I'm going to give it as 30. When I press enter, the code finishes. Why does it finish? Because I have not taken any output. So if I want to take an output of the value that I have typed in, I will type in print round bracket open close, and I will type in my variable. Simple input given a data type assigned to a variable, and then taking the output of that variable. So pressing F10, I'll input 30, and I get the output as well. The value that I typed in is going to be the output of my program. So let's say I'm going to have 50 gets assigned. Another thing, that basic arithmetic operations can also be done in your print commands or in your outputs. If you are to add something, if you are to subtract something, divide something, take modulus off, I'll talk about the symbols as well. But yes, you can do that in direct print commands as well. So if I want, let's say, add 10 to this, so I would say print a plus 10 and execute this. The value is 20. The answer, which needs to be my output, is 30. So basic operations or basic arithmetic operations can be done directly in the output of your command as well. Moving on, if I want to concatenate, if I want to have a custom message along with my output, okay, so I'm going to take the input from the user. It is going to be assigned to a variable. After that, this is going to be addition of 10 as well, but I want this to be concatenated, or I want this to be presented along with a message. So again, this can be done in the output message directly. So we start off with speech marks. Let's say after adding 10 to your number, right? So that number is basically what? Number is basically the variable a. Now variable a is not going to be mentioned within the speech mark. So what do? We put a comma and a. Please note that I have given a space after number. So this space is going to be between number and the value that I input. So after adding 10 to your number a, right, put a comma again the custom message, the total is, and after that I have applied the operation. So basically the message is going to be after adding 10 to your number, the number is going to be displayed here. What number? The number which I am going to input over here. The total is, and then we have the operation. So the value is going to be added with 10. So let's run this. I forgot to put a comma, which is to be over here. So shift F10. Now input a value, let's say 30. Now when I press enter, it will say that after adding 10 to your number 30, the total is 40. Right? So you can see the custom message. So after adding 10 to your number 30, the total is 40. So this is how you concatenate directly in your output statements. And you can also print this with calculations. Now, when we talk about calculations, let's talk about some basic symbols. For addition, you are to use the plus sign in your code. For subtraction, you are to use minus sign for the subtraction. For division, it's going to be a forward slash. If you are to multiply, you are going to use an aesthetic. Okay, let's put them in one line like this so that it's easier to see. After that, we also have the exponent, right? Exponent is basically what? The power. So we can have exponent to be having a double star in it. We also have the div. Div is actually the when you divide two numbers, so the integer number of division, that is basically becomes the answer. So I can also execute an example for this, but for now, division is basically the div is going to be written as 2 forward slashes. Then we have modulus, which is actually the remainder of the division between the two numbers, which is to be denoted by a percentage sign. Okay, so keep these in mind. Another tactic or a technique to disable something within your code. So for instance, if I shift F10, you can see that this is invalid text because the processor is detecting that these statements are basically not an actual code. So they are errors, you need to fix them. And the best thing about PyCharm is that it's going to highlight where and which line you have your error. So since it's an interpreter, so interpreter basically means that it's going to process each and every instruction one by one. So even if you fix the error in line 12, next time you're going to run it, it's going to detect an error in line 13, then in 14, then in 15, then in 16. So one by one. So whichever the first line you have the error in, it will prompt and it will ask you to fix the error. Now, programmers, they use a technique to disable a block of code. Okay? So the disable the block of code is simply by adding a hashtag. Once I add the hashtag, that particular line is basically being converted into a comment, which is not a part of your executable code. So you can write as many words or letters you want, and you may write them as in whichever way you want. So now if I press Shift F10, so you can see did not detect any syntax error. I need to input my value, let's say 30. If I press enter, the value is after adding 10 to you, so it's basically executing my same command. Now let's change the operators. Subtraction. Okay, so let's have this next statement that or over here I'm going to make changes to it. So let's say I'm going to add minus, right? So after not adding 10, after subtracting 10 from your number, okay, so this is going to be from your number A, the total is this. So run this, we input a value, let's say 60, the answer should be 50, as you can see over here. So this is minus division. Again, you can use /. Now I'm not going to change the text. Let's have it, instead of that, let's have it like this. Let's remove the custom message. So now it's going to divide the input by 10. Okay, so Shift F10, input the value. Let's say I'm going to put in 200. So when it's divided by 10, the answer should be 20. Okay, so this was division. Let's talk about multiply. This is going to be multiply. So whatever number you input, it's going to be multiplied with 10. Shift F10. The value I'm going to type in is 30. Multiplied with 10, the answer should be 300. So you can see that. Exponent. Okay, so exponent needs to have 2 stars, and let's say a raised to the power of 2. Okay, Shift F10, the input the value, let's say I'm going to have it as 6, right? The answer comes out to be 36 because 6 raised to power 2 or 6 square is actually 36. So this is how you type in the exponent. Then we have the div. Div is basically forward 2 slashes, and the answer comes out to be Shift F10. Number I'm going to input is 15. So if you divide 15 by 2, 7 multiplied by 2 is 14, right? So the answer to this is, if I type in 15 for my A, divide by 2, the answer will come out to be 7. The remainder part is not calculated. It won't give you the answer up until the decimal part. It will just consider the whole number of division. So that's the function of div. If I want the modulus, which is actually the remainder, so let's say modulus, I'll run this again, and the number is going to be 15 again. 15 divided by 2, 7. Now this time is going to be ignored. The remainder comes out to be 1, so the answer is going to be 1. So these were the basic arithmetic operators. Now moving on, let's have 2 variables. Let's say b is also equals to integer, and we are going to take the input from the user. So we type in input bracket, and I will type in please input your second, or let's say second number, and over here I'm going to type in input your first number, right? I'm going to take the input from the user. Okay, so if I run this, the first number is basically 20. Let's say let's have the numcat run it again. All right, so 20, and the second number is 30, right? Taken the input and the code finishes. If I want to have the print, I can have the print of A, right? I can even have a space, and let's say I'm going to have it B. So it's going to output both the values that I input. So Shift F10, and there's going to be space in between. So one value is 20, let's say 30 is the second value, and you can see both the values are being a part of my output. Now, if you are to make a comparison, which is actually the selection statements. Now, selection statements, the usual format or the parameters are that there's going to be an if. You are going to have your logical test. Then you are to type in then you are to give your value if true. Then you type in else, and then you need to have your value if false. Okay, so this is the basic format which we follow in our pseudocodes as well. So yeah, this is how it is. This then in the pseudocode can be written over here. It can be written in the first line as well, like this. Okay, and when we talk about the selection statements, what you need to keep in mind that in pseudocode you also have to mention and if, right? Regardless, you also need to type in if in capital. You also have to write and if in capital, right? That's the pseudocode part. However, in Python, what you need to do is just need to write if and then your logical test. The logical test does not have to be enclosed in round brackets. It can be enclosed if you want. If you want to make sense, for instance, the expression is too complex, you need to make use of the brackets, you can use them. Even if you don't, you can straight away write down your comparison or your logical test. So let's say if the value of A is greater than the value of B. When that happens, you have to write down then. Then needs to be represented by a colon. Okay. After that, you can see that when I pressed enter, it automatically moved on to the second line and it is a bit indented from the left. That means the Python automatically detected that your logical statement is done. You have typed in then, which is represented by the colon, and you are to write the value if true following this sequence, right? The value of true is print. Print needs to be print, and let's say A is smaller than value B, or the first number is smaller than the second number. Okay, so you get the point. Next, you press enter. You can keep on adding instructions in your value if true. You can have multiple instructions, which is why when I press enter, it came down under the same line. However, if I want to, or let's say I'm done with the number of instructions over here, I can, add in more instructions. Let's say print of A. Okay, so that's another part which is going to be part of my value true. Once this is done, I'm going to type in else. When I press enter, now Python automatically detects that I need to type in my value of false. What usually the students forget to do is put a colon over here. So after else, there's going to be a colon. Now, if the value of A is not greater than the value of B, I'm going to print that B over here, the logical statement, the value of true needs to be value of A is larger than value B. And over here, B is larger than the value B. And also, I'm going to print B. Okay, I hope it makes sense. Now, when I run this, it's going to have an error over here because this is not a programming code. So when I run this, as you can see, it detected that these are basically no line of code. So what we can do is we can just convert them to comments by putting up a pound symbol or hashtag. Now it should be okay. So Shift F10, input your first number. Let's say I'm going to input 20, and the second number is basically 30. So basically A is not greater than B. So that means these instructions should be processed. When I press enter, sorry, over here when I press enter, you can see B is larger than the value B, and the value of B is actually printed. So you can have multiple instructions in your value of true and in your value of false. All that you need to focus on is you don't have to mention end if, and you are to use the colon after else. After the logical statement, you are to use the colon symbol to represent then, else you also have to put a colon after else. So keep that in mind. Now in the selection statement, in the pseudocode, you also have done the case statements. Case statements or end case, case or end case, they basically don't exist in Python. Simple, right? So what do? Instead of having multiple options for the same scenario, you are to use the nested if. It operates in the same way. What happens is, for example, you have four options. There are four options or four types of outputs that you can be, or they can be. Okay. Now what happens that you can go with the option A, you can go with option B, you can go with option C and D. So instead of having case statements, Python says that, okay, I can only understand nested if. And nested if is basically how, I'll just write down the formula. So if, then you are to put in your logical test. Then you need to type in then, right? Then you go on, then you need to type in your value if true, right? So this is basically true for your first option. But if the first option is false, you type in your else. And then you are left with three more options. The three more options are basically going to be in the false of the first option. So if it is not the first option, you're going to go with option 2 or 3 or 4. That means in the value false of your first option, you're going to type in if again. And again the same sequence, logical test. Then you type in then value if true. Once this is done, you have catered two options. You move on. Now you need to type in else. Still, you are left with two more options. Again, the same sequence happens. If, logical test. So you get the point. This is how you actually move on to the next condition. Now in Python, there's no such thing as else if. As you can see in pseudocode, you may write else if together. You may separate the else if as well. They can be written separately. Else if. The way I've written over here, you can do that. There's no problem. But in Python, what you need to do is you need to use elif. Okay. So for instance, I'll write if A is greater than B, then print A. Okay. Then you are to write elif. And straight away, you're going to type in if A or is greater than C, then you type print A. You're left with two more comparisons. So you can write in elif again. If A is greater than D, then print A. Okay. And let's say you are to make another comparison, or let's say you're left with the last option. Now the last option is basically going to be considered as false. Okay. So for that, you don't have to write elif, you simply have to write else. And then else print, let's say B. Okay. So this is how you basically make a sequence of nested if in Python. Right? I hope you were able to follow through. I was not too fast because I just wanted to wrap it up as quickly as possible. So all the concepts that we have done and the assignment which I gave to you, if you have understood whatever is being discussed and taught to you in this particular lecture, you should be having no problems in trying to find out. I'm not saying that you will be able to, but I'm saying just trying to find out the answer, or let's say try to code the answers to the assignment questions. Okay. The last thing that I would want to discuss are the comparisons. Now, in other languages, we have understanding of using the equals to. So single equals to is basically for the assignment statements, right? And double equals to is for the comparison of value, and triple equals to is for the comparison of value and data type. But in Python, triple equals to condition does not exist. Instead, it does the same thing with double equals to. So it's a comparison of value and data type. So what do I mean by this is, let's have this code removed. Let's have this as hashtag as a comment, this as a comment as well. Let's change the B to, let's say, a string. Okay, we are going to take input of two values. So shift F10, the first number is, let's say, 20, the second number is, let's say, 30, right? The 30 that I have input, although it seems to be a number, but the data type I have assigned is a string. Now if A is equals to B, okay, and I'm going to type in the value of true, so I would say that print both the values are equal and their data type are same as well, right? Then is going to be taken care of by else. Put a colon. I would say both the values are same, but their data type is different, right? So now if we execute this, the first number that I'm going to type in is 20. Second number is also going to be 20, right? Enter. Both the values are same, but their data type is different. Why? Because the second value that I input, although it seems to be a number, but it is being converted into a string. So when the comparison is done with 2 equals to, it's not only comparing the values, it is also comparing the data type. So keep that in mind, that when you put double equals to, it's basically a comparison of value and the data type. Then the standard operators, greater than, then we have lesser than, then we have greater than, equals to, greater than, equals to, and then we have lesser than equals to, lesser than equals to, right? So these were the basics, starting from the installation, the declarations, the data types, the input messages, the outputs, shortcut to run the code, and several other concepts of including the operators and the comparison operators and the arithmetic operators. And then we also talked about the selection statements and the case select. I hope you were able to follow all of this. If you have any queries, do post them in the comments below and I will try to answer them, or you can bring them to your class and we can discuss them. So if you're able to follow this, you are good to go for the other lectures, and hopefully by tomorrow we'll be covering the loops, how to do or how to deal with loops in Python. Thank you very much for watching and hope that you like the video and you can gain something from this. The Office.